Try and keep myself to time. Ladies and gentlemen, councillors, fellow Oireachtas members, it's a great pleasure, as always, to come to the magnificent Donegal and a great honour to be asked to speak here at the MacGill Summer School. I'd like to start by thanking Joe and the team for organising an incredible agenda, an incredible week of political discourse and culture and the arts. So, new politics. What is it and why do we need it? I'd like to start from the following premise. Ireland is a fantastic country. We're a small, damp island. Thank you. We're a small, damp island on the edge of Europe. We don't have big deposits of gold, of diamonds, or of minerals. Our oil and gas fields are difficult to access, and we don't have the epic architecture of being an imperial nation in our past. And yet, we have a rich and vibrant cultural heritage. When it comes to donating to disasters and developing countries, we're one of the most generous nations on earth. The Good Country Index measures what each country contributes to the common good of humanity and what it takes away. It uses a wide range of data from the UN, from the World Bank, from the WHO and other organisations. And it gives every country a balance sheet to show whether it's a net creditor to mankind, a burden on the planet, or somewhere in between. Out of the 125 countries ranked in 2014, Ireland came first. We are the goodest country on earth. In 2013, Ireland had the highest rate of third-level degree attainment in the European Union, with just over half of all 30 to 34-year-olds having completed third-level education. In the Global Peace Index, of the 162 countries ranked, Ireland comes 12th. Ignoring this year's odd GDP figures, over the last few years we've had the fastest growing economy in Europe. Our economy is now rated as one of the most competitive economies on earth. We have a vibrant community sector, from cancer support groups to GAA to other sports groups to volunteer organisations like the Scouts and the Guides. We don't do ugly right-wing extremism. We've made the headlines around the world for writing gay marriage into our constitution. The UN have a measure called the Human Development Index, and it's used to try and measure the general prosperity of a country. It includes GDP per capita, life expectancy, and educational attainment. The UN measures 188 countries, and Ireland, having just come out of a deep, dark recession, today, of the 188 countries, ranks joint 6th. Incredible social and economic progress has been made and continues to be made, and credit for that, in part, must go to our political system and, by definition, old politics. The Democracy Index ranks the effectiveness of democracies in 167 countries. It's based on the electoral process, pluralism, civil liberties, the functioning of government, political participation and political culture. And of the 167 countries it looks at, we're 12th. We're 12th of 167 countries, and it's getting better. The imbalance of power between the executive arm of government and Parliament is being addressed. Parliament now orders its own business. TDs like me have far greater opportunities to table our own motions, to table our own legislation, and those motions are now being passed. Parliament will shortly have its own budgetary office, and it will shortly have its own legal office. The budgetary cycle is being redesigned to ensure Parliament has far greater input to budgets, and will have far greater access to information, and budgets will be equality-proofed. So, what's the problem? Why are we even talking about the need for new politics when we have achieved all of that with old politics? Let's start with the international context. The world, as we know, is becoming a more turbulent place. The global economy is far more connected than it ever was. Ireland's economy is growing, but it's fragile. Recent growth has come in the main from foreign multinationals that operate here. One of the reasons they're here, as we know, is for our taxation system. And that taxation system is coming under increasing international pressure. And I believe that this year's or last year's 26% GDP figure has just painted a big bullseye on Ireland when it comes to people looking at international tax affairs. Very disturbingly, global wealth has become consolidated in a way it never was before. Today, half the world's wealth, I can't remember the population of the world, but it's over 7 billion, I think, isn't it? Whatever it is, half of the wealth on the entire planet is now owned by 65 people. That's a small fraction of the people in this room today. Europe is becoming more fractured. Brexit, obviously, is the most recent example, but we have Golden Dawn in Greece. We have Alternative for Deutschland in Germany. We have the National Front in France, the True Finn Party in Finland, the Freedom Party in Austria. The list goes on. Many US citizens are considering voting for a man who wants the Mexicans to build a wall on the US-Mexican border and who wants to ban Muslims from the United States. Global warming is already leading to regional tensions, and we're already beginning to see migrants coming from global warming. Excuse me. When I was 21, I did my long hair and sandals. I actually had long hair when I was 21. And I travelled in Asia. I travelled all over the world. And never once in the time that I travelled did anyone ever say, well, you want to go to Pakistan? You can't really do that. You want to go to Syria? Not necessarily a safe thing to do. You want to go here, here, here? It never came up. You could go anywhere. The worst it was when women who were travelling, they might say, well, I want to go to Pakistan, and they might get some advice and saying, well, look, you're going to have to wear appropriate clothes and so forth. But there was no danger. That world doesn't exist today. And then there's the domestic context for new politics. We have one of the most expensive healthcare systems on earth. It is staffed by some of the best trained clinicians on earth. And yet ranking after ranking shows that it has some of the poorest outcomes. We have a pensions time bomb coming that, if not addressed, is going to make the banking crisis look like a picnic. We had a decision just last week to privatise the new fibre optic network. Watch this space. An entire generation has been financially destroyed by negative equity and forgotten. We're experiencing homelessness, a rental crisis, a home ownership crisis, a housing crisis, all at the same time. At least some of the vulture funds that have come here and bought loan books from the likes of NAMA, the IBRC and others are using something called Section 110 status, which means they're not paying taxes on vast amounts of profits being generated in Ireland off the backs of Irish mortgage holders, many of whom are trying to pay their way out of negative equity or avoid eviction. Working conditions are being eroded. Childcare is some of the most expensive on earth. Car insurance premiums have exploded. Irish SMEs are paying far more for their loans than their European counterparts. And then there's this. 750,000 people in our beautiful republic are living in poverty. Now, here is how that poverty is defined. That their incomes and resources being so inadequate as to preclude them from having a standard of living that is regarded as acceptable by Irish society generally. 1 in 7 children in our republic now live in households that meet that definition. Our republic should be one in which every single child grows up with the opportunity to achieve their potential. It should be a republic in which every person can lead a life of dignity, from birth, through school, through work, into retirement. And it should be a republic that champions both economic strength and a decent society. And that is why we need new politics. Because old politics is not suited to the new world. Because old politics will not deliver us the republic that we are capable of creating. So, what is new politics? For now, the numbers are such in the Dáil that those in government need the support of those outside government. That is the nexus of new politics. It's not about people having woken up one day in March and decided, actually, we need to change the system. It is the raw pragmatism of dull algebra. And so there are only two challenges. Challenge number one, how do we use this period of time to create as much positive change as possible? And challenge number two, how do we lock those changes in so that when the dull algebra changes, these important political changes don't get washed away in the tide? So, what changes are needed? You can track much of the challenges we're facing back to the same shortcomings. We need vision and long-term planning. We need to base decisions on data and evidence. We need to challenge the status quo, something we're not very good at in this country. We need technical capability, transparency, and a strong parliament. In the short term, I'm going to say something risky here, and say that the politicians appear to be stepping up to the plate, with a wide range of changes currently being introduced. However, the study of behavioural change tells us that while organisations are pretty good at achieving change in the short term, they're really bad at achieving change in the long term. 4 conditions need to be met. First, people need to see senior colleagues acting in a new way. Second, they need to understand why these changes are needed. Third, they need to be capable of making the required changes. And fourth, they need to be rewarded for making those changes. Now, meeting these conditions requires political leadership. Senior politicians need to sit with their parties and explain to them what the benefits of new politics are, why we need to change, why we need to focus on the long term just as much as we focus on the short term. And then these senior politicians need to act in this way, and they need to be seen acting in these new ways. New politics requires many of the technical changes that are already happening, many of which are being spoken about in MacGill this week, things like a parliamentary budgetary office, things like a parliamentary legal office. But we in politics need help. We need your help. We need help from a great deal of places. The media has a role to play. Let me give you an example. I spoke to a minister in the last government and said, why is there no continuous professional development for TDs? We would never allow people who treat us when we're sick or who teach our children to go into a job and receive not a day's additional training. But that's what we do for the people running the country. And he said, yeah, I know, we all know that, but if we ever did it, we'd be massacred by the media. So it doesn't happen. And I think he's probably right. The media, for new politics to work, it has to cover more diverse voices. In the general election, there were 4 televised debates. They were very important debates. 3 of those debates excluded the Social Democrats, the Greens, People Before Profit, AAA, Renewa, the Independents. Now, that to me amounts to state censorship. Right, today, look at the political polls. Look at any political poll and it'll say Fianna Fáil up, Fine Gael down, Labour something, Sinn Féin something, and that's it. I've actually had to go looking to the pollsters for data on how the Social Democrats are doing or on how other political parties are doing. So the media has a role to play. Academia has a role to play. There's far too much sitting in splendid isolation by academics in this country. Academics must become more vocal. They need to engage more with politicians to help drive a policy agenda, and they need to speak out when they see politicians clearly distorting the facts, something politicians are really, really good at. The business sector has a role to play. Now, during the election, business groups called for many important policy changes, investment in education and infrastructure, making childcare affordable and so forth. But they also called for sweeping tax cuts, in the full knowledge that sweeping tax cuts would make it impossible to deliver on the investment in infrastructure and so forth that they were demanding. Public servants have a role to play, because they're the ones who know where the real opportunities are. Now, for example, I've spoken to many healthcare professionals who have told me about egregious things going on in the healthcare sector. And when I say to them, will you talk about this? I'm a politician. People inherently mistrust me. You're a doctor. People inherently trust you. Please speak on it. They say, no, it's not worth my job. In my own constituency, the local hospital was being downgraded. It was being downgraded for good reason. I and the other TDs met with the clinicians. I said, is it the unanimous view of the clinical team that this will save lives? And they said, it is our absolutely unambiguous unanimous view. And I said, will you please state that publicly? No, not acceptable. Finally, the public has a role to play. Ultimately, the public choose politicians, and politicians will behave in ways that the public want. It's very hard to convince politicians to invest serious time in policy development and long-term planning if they get votes for delivering locally. I was on the Finance Committee in the last Dáil. A lot of important work was done. Banking, mortgage crisis, NAMA, etc. But most of the Finance Committee members didn't show up on a regular basis. And when they showed up, there was a core who did and who came prepared, but many who showed up weren't prepared. Why? Because there's no votes in it and they won't get media attention for it. So I'll finish on this. If Ireland is to navigate the modern world, as we must, if we are to build a republic that looks after all of our children, a republic that champions opportunity for all and dignity for all, a republic with a strong economy, thriving communities and great public services. If we are to achieve all of those things, and we can, then we need new politics. For now, anyway, I believe the politicians are stepping up to the plate. But we need your help. Thank you.